I thought I was going to my mother-in-law's house to water her favorite orchid and pick up a forgotten scarf. I had no idea that the moment I stepped through that door, alone, exactly as she had asked, I would find the velvet box that had belonged to my grandmother. Empty, wiped clean, sitting on Leah's vanity, like a trophy from a war I hadn't even known we were fighting. She had planned it perfectly. The request was so small, so soft. "Come tomorrow, sweetheart, without Daniel. I just need a little company," that I hadn't thought twice. But the empty box wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the receipt on the nightstand beside it, dated 3 days earlier, from a jewelry consignment shop 2 towns over, and next to the receipt, in my husband's handwriting, a note that said, "She agreed. Done." We had been married for 4 years when Leah first started asking about the brooch. Not in any direct way. Leah never did anything directly. She would circle a thing the way a hawk circles before it dives, making long, lazy arcs that seemed harmless until the moment the talons came out. The first time, we were sitting at her kitchen table after Sunday dinner, the kind of dinner she staged rather than cooked. Linen napkins, a roast that had been photographed before it was carved, candles she lit only when we visited. I had been clearing plates, and Daniel was laughing at something his younger brother had said, and Leah had looked at my collarbone and said, very casually, "Is that the piece your grandmother left you?" I touched it reflexively, a small gold brooch in the shape of a hummingbird, set with chips of garnet and one tiny emerald eye. My grandmother had worn it every Sunday of her adult life. She'd pressed it into my palm 3 weeks before she died and told me to wear it when I needed courage. "It's been in enough hard rooms," she'd said, her thumb moving over the wing. "It knows how to hold steady." I had smiled at Leah and said yes. She had nodded, once, with an expression I couldn't read, and changed the subject to her hydrangeas. That was 18 months before I stood in her bedroom, holding an empty velvet box with my legs going numb beneath me. In those 18 months, I had been so focused on building what I thought was a life that I hadn't paid enough attention to the quiet erosion happening beneath it. Daniel and I had moved into our apartment, a real one, not a starter place, with a second bedroom we joked was the future, and a kitchen window that caught the afternoon light in a way that made everything look golden. I was working as a dental technician at a practice downtown, the kind of steady, respected work that paid well enough that we had savings and a small investment account, and the reasonable feeling that we were going somewhere. Daniel worked in logistics for a regional shipping company. Decent money, decent hours. We weren't rich, but we were solid. We were the kind of couple that other people looked at and said, "They've got it together." What I didn't fully see, or maybe chose not to see, was that Leah had never accepted that solidity as mine. In her architecture of the world, everything Daniel had was something she had built, and everything I had was temporary occupancy. The apartment was where her son lived. The savings account was money her son had earned. And the hummingbird brooch? Well, that was a different category entirely. That was something I had, something beautiful and irreplaceable, something that had nothing to do with Daniel and everything to do with me. And I think that was precisely why she wanted it. The first real warning came in November, about 8 months after the kitchen table comment. We had gone to Leah's for her birthday, just the 4 of us, Daniel, me, Leah, and her younger son, Marco, who lived 40 minutes away and visited less and less. Marco had brought wine. I had brought a photo album I'd spent 3 weeks assembling, full of pictures of Leah through the years, young, laughing, holding both her boys. I was proud of it. I thought she would love it. She opened it, turned 3 pages, set it down, and said, "You know what I would have loved? Your grandmother's brooch, just to hold for a while. Some things deserve to be shared." The room went quiet the way rooms do when something has been said that can't be unsaid. Marco looked at his wine glass. Daniel looked at me with an expression I could only describe as braced, like he was waiting for something to land. I felt a cold tickle at the base of my throat and said lightly, "It's a little delicate for everyday handling, but maybe I'll wear it next time I visit." She smiled. The smile didn't reach her eyes. It never did. That smile of hers was a sharp, careful arc of lips that performed warmth without producing any. "Of course, sweetheart," she said, "whenever you're comfortable." I told myself it was nothing. I told myself she was lonely and a little entitled, and that these were known quantities I had already accounted for. I made excuses the way I always did. She misses her husband. She's from a different generation. She expresses love and control because that's all she was ever taught. I was good at excuses. I had been making them for 4 years. Daniel said nothing about it on the drive home. I waited, watching the streetlights stripe across his hands on the wheel, and he said nothing. When we got inside, he went straight to the kitchen, poured a glass of water, drank it standing at the counter with his back to me. "She didn't mean anything by it," he said finally to the sink. "You know how she is." "I know exactly how she is," I said. "That's what worries me." He turned around then, and his face was tired in a way that had nothing to do with the hour. "Clara," he said. That was all. Just my name, like a gentle discouragement, like a hand placed lightly on a door to keep it from opening. I let it close. I shouldn't have, but I let it close, and I went to bed, and in the morning, the light was golden in the kitchen window again, and the coffee was good, and the day rolled forward the way days do when you decide not to examine what you've seen. The second warning was sharper. It came in January, on a Wednesday evening when Daniel was 20 minutes late coming home, and I was heating soup on the stove. His phone was charging on the counter. He always forgot it in the kitchen, and it buzzed with a text preview before the screen locked. I wasn't snooping. I wasn't even looking at it directly, but the preview was large, and I was standing close, and I read it before I understood what I was reading. It was from Leah. It said, "Think about what I said. The shop in Millfield does appraisals on Thursdays. No pressure, just information." I stood very still with the ladle in my hand and the soup making soft sounds behind me. No pressure, just information. The kind of sentence that means precisely the opposite of what it says. I set the ladle down and picked up the phone and looked at the screen, locked now, showing nothing. I put it back exactly where it had been. I turned off the burner. I stood in the middle of my golden kitchen and thought, what shop? What appraisal? What exactly has she said to him? When Daniel came in, I watched his eyes go to his phone first. Just a flicker, barely anything, but I had been looking for it. He kissed me on the cheek. He said something about traffic. He asked what was for dinner, and I handed him a bowl of soup and said carefully, "Did you talk to your mom today?" He stirred the soup. "Briefly," he said. "She called this afternoon. Nothing important." He did not look up. I watched the back of his spoon moving in slow circles, and I thought, he is lying. He is lying to my face about something, and he doesn't even have the decency to do it badly. But I said nothing. I ate my soup. I watched him. And I started paying attention in a way I hadn't before. Quieter, more methodical. Like someone who has realized the house has a slow leak and has started listening for the drip. Over the next 2 months, I noticed things I had been too comfortable to notice before. Leah called Daniel more frequently, and the calls often happened when I was in another room. Not because he left the room, but because he angled himself away, lowered his voice, turned his body into a wall. When I entered mid-conversation, there was a particular kind of pause, a recalibration, before he continued, and the topics shifted seamlessly to mundane things. Once, I came into the kitchen to find him standing at the window with his phone pressed to his ear, and when he saw me, he said into it, "Okay, Mom, I'll let you know," and hung up before I'd taken 3 steps. I asked what he'd let her know. He said she was thinking about repainting her hallway and wanted his opinion on a color. I nodded. I stored it. I started wearing the brooch less. I told myself it was because I didn't want to damage it at work, that the chemicals and the gloves were bad for the setting, that I was being responsible. But the The truth I admitted to myself only in the small hours when Daniel was asleep beside me and the apartment was absolutely still was that I was afraid. Not of Leah taking it by force. That seemed too dramatic, too direct for her. I was afraid of the subtler thing, the thing I couldn't quite name yet, the thing that lived in phone calls with lowered voices and texts about jewelry appraisals on Thursdays, and my husband's eyes that had recently learned to look at the table instead of at me. I moved the brooch from its usual spot on the top shelf of my jewelry box to a small pouch inside the inner pocket of my winter coat, which lived in the back of the closet beneath a dry cleaning bag. It felt paranoid. It felt necessary. I felt ashamed of both feelings. In March, Leah called me directly, which she rarely did, preferring to route communication through Daniel, like dispatches through a middleman. She was warm, warmer than usual, the particular warmth she deployed when she wanted something. She asked about my week, my work, whether I'd been getting enough sleep, and I answered each question with the careful politeness of someone diffusing a device they don't fully understand. Then she said, "I've been thinking about doing some spring cleaning. There's so much in this house, things I've been holding on to that should belong to the people who love them. I thought maybe you could come by sometime, just the two of us, and we could go through some of it together. It might be nice." I said that sounded lovely. I agreed to nothing specific. I hung up and sat with the phone in my lap for a long time, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, counting the things I knew and the things I didn't. It was 2 weeks after that call that she texted me, not Daniel, me, with the message that sent everything unraveling. It came on a Thursday morning while I was eating breakfast. "Don't water the flower tomorrow. I'll do it when I get back. But could you come by in the afternoon, sweetheart? I have something for you. Come alone, without Daniel. I want it to be just us girls. Around 2 o'clock? There was an orchid on her windowsill that I had been watering on Fridays when she had her hair appointment. That detail alone made it feel ordinary. The rest of it, the something for you, the come alone, felt like a gift, a peace offering, the kind of gesture that made me want to believe I had been wrong about all of it. Maybe she had found something of her own to give me. Maybe this was her way of reaching across the distance between us. I texted back, "Of course. See you at 2. I told Daniel I was going to his mother's. He looked up from his coffee and said, "Yeah?" And something crossed his face. Not surprise exactly, more like a timing calculation, a brief internal adjustment. And then he said, "Okay, tell her I said hi." He did not ask why. He did not ask what for. He went back to his coffee, and I pulled on my jacket, and I walked out into the pale spring afternoon with a feeling I couldn't name, not dread, not hope, something suspended between the two, like a held breath. Her house smelled, as it always did, of lavender and something underneath the lavender that was older and harder to identify. Furniture polish, maybe, or the particular staleness of a home that is cleaned obsessively but rarely opened to fresh air. I let myself in with the spare key she'd given me 2 years ago, calling her name as I came through the door. No answer. The house was quiet. The orchid on the windowsill was fine, green and white and unbothered, not in any need of watering. I called again. Nothing. I assumed she'd stepped out briefly and moved through the hallway toward the kitchen to wait. That was when I saw her bedroom door was ajar. I don't know what made me push it open. Instinct, maybe, or the particular quality of the silence. Not the silence of an empty house, but the silence of a held secret, something that had weight and shape and had been waiting for someone to find it. I pushed the door open and stepped in, and the afternoon light came through the curtains in long, pale rectangles, and on the vanity, in the center of a cleared space between her perfume bottles and her hand mirror, sat a small rectangular velvet box, dark green, worn at the corners. I had kept that box for 11 years. My feet moved before my mind gave the instruction. I crossed the room in 4 steps and picked up the box and opened it. The silk lining inside, cream, slightly faded, was empty. The small indentation where the brooch had nested for decades held nothing but shadow. My hands were already shaking. My eyes moved to the nightstand, to the receipt lying there in plain sight as if it had been left for me to find, which, I understood in the next half second, it had. The receipt was from a consignment jeweler in Millfield. The date was Tuesday. The item described was a Victorian-style gold hummingbird brooch, garnet and emerald, estate piece, 14 carat. And beside it, on a folded square of notepaper, in my husband's handwriting, 3 words and 1 period. She agreed. Done. The world did not go dark. That is what I remember most clearly, that everything stayed exactly the same. The curtains were pale and still. The perfume bottles on the vanity caught the light in small amber flashes. And I stood in my mother-in-law's bedroom holding an empty velvet box, and the world refused to do anything dramatic to acknowledge what had just happened to me. My legs buckled first. Not all the way, I didn't fall, but my knees softened and I sat down heavily on the edge of Leah's bed, on her white duvet with its embroidered border, and I stared at the silk lining inside the box. Cream, slightly faded, an indentation in the shape of a small bird with spread wings. 11 years of my grandmother's absence held in that shallow hollow, and now, nothing. Not even the ghost of warmth. Just the shape of what was gone. I picked up the receipt with hands that had not yet started shaking. That came later. I read it 3 times. The description was clinical and exact. Victorian-style gold hummingbird brooch, garnet and emerald, estate piece, 14 carat, appraised at $1,400. Consignment price, $1,200. Tuesday, 3 days ago. And beside it, on a folded square of notepaper, in my husband's handwriting, she agreed. Done. She agreed. As if I had been consulted. As if I had sat somewhere across a table and said, yes, take it, sell it, it is yours now. As if my agreement were something that could be assumed rather than obtained. I set the receipt down. I set the box down. I looked around the room with the desperate scan of someone searching for an exit in a burning building. There was no exit. The room was exactly what it was. The shaking, when it came, began in my hands and moved upward into my chest, where it resolved into something deeper. Not trembling, but a structural vibration, like a building absorbing a shockwave and still deciding whether to stand. I pressed my palms against my thighs and told myself, you are here. You are still standing, barely, but standing. Then I heard the front door open. Leah's footsteps were unhurried. She had always walked as if she owned every surface she crossed. I heard her come through the hallway. I heard her pause just outside the bedroom door, a half-second pause that told me she had planned for this moment, had arranged it, had left the receipt and the note in plain sight deliberately, as a stage set designed for precisely this confrontation. Then she came in, carrying 2 paper cups of coffee from the bakery down the street, dressed in her soft gray cardigan, her pearl earrings, her hair carefully set. She looked at me on her bed with the empty box and the documents, and she did not flinch, not even a flicker. "Sweetheart," she said, "you found it." The word found sat in the air like a lit match. "Where is my grandmother's brooch?" I said. She set the cups on the dresser. She sat in the chair by the window with the ease of someone settling in for a conversation she had been looking forward to. "It's been taken to a very reputable shop," she said. "Daniel and I talked about it at length. The brooch was sitting in a box, not being used. The money will be genuinely helpful." She held one of the paper cups toward me. "I got you a latte. 2 sugars, the way you like." I did not take the cup. I stood up. The shaking in my chest had resolved itself into something colder and more focused, the way fever sometimes breaks, not into sweat, but into a strange, brilliant clarity. "The money goes where, exactly?" I said. "Into a joint account," she said smoothly, "for the family." "Which family? Which account?" The faintest recalculation moved across her face. "Daniel will explain the details." "Daniel," I said quietly, "is going to explain a great deal of things." I picked up the receipt. I picked up his note. I picked up the empty box. I walked past her, through the hallway, out the front door, and I did not look back. The spring air hit me like a flat hand against my face. I stood on her step for 3 seconds, a woman in the afternoon light holding an empty box and the wreckage of something enormous. And then I walked to my car and drove. I went to my father's house. He was in the garden when I pulled up, and he saw my face through the windshield before I'd opened the door, and he put down his hose. I handed him the receipt and the note without speaking. He read them both twice. Then he looked at me over the top of the paper with an expression so quiet and so absolutely certain that something in me finally broke. Not in the way of collapsing, but in the way of a dam releasing a long-held pressure. "How long have they been planning this?" he said. "Months," I said. "Maybe longer." He put his arm around my shoulders and walked me inside and made tea, and we sat at his kitchen table while I told him everything. The Sunday dinner comment, the appraisal text, the calls that ended when I entered the room. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. "She left the receipt out on purpose," he said. "She wanted the confrontation on her ground, with her prepared speech, you off balance and alone." "It worked," I said. "It worked today," he said. "Not tomorrow." He went to his desk and tore a page from his address book. "Margaret Chen, Family Law and Asset Protection. You call her tonight, and you say nothing to Daniel until you have." I called Margaret that evening. Within 4 minutes, she had asked 3 questions so precise that I felt, for the first time since that bedroom, that I was in the presence of someone who understood exactly what kind of situation this was. She told me to photograph everything, open a separate account by the end of the week, contact the shop in Millfield the next morning and inform them, not ask, inform, that the item was under legal dispute and must be held. She would send a formal letter by the following afternoon. I did everything she said, with a steadiness that surprised me. I found the brooch already listed on the shop's website, photographed under studio lights against velvet, tagged Estate Victorian Hummingbird Brooch, Garnet and Emerald, priced to sell, and I screenshotted it and added it to the folder I was building at my father's printer. Daniel called 3 times that evening. I let them go to voicemail. His third message said, "It's just a piece of jewelry, Clara. We can get you another one." I played it to Margaret the next morning. There was a pause on her end. "Keep that," she said. "Keep every message." The second document arrived the following Tuesday. In the course of preparing the legal letter, Margaret had pulled the records on Daniel's investment account, the account where a portion of my salary was deposited each month, and found that 18 months ago, 6 weeks after the Sunday dinner where Leah had first asked about the brooch, Daniel had added his mother as a joint account holder. 18 months. The timeline rearranged itself in my mind with cold, mechanical precision. The comment about the brooch, then the account, then 4 months of planning the consignment, then the invitation, come alone, without Daniel, and the stage-set bedroom. It was not opportunism. It was architecture, built slowly, in the dark, beneath everything I had trusted. I confronted Daniel on a Wednesday evening in our golden kitchen, with the folder on the table between us. He came through the door and saw it and stood in the doorway with his keys in his hand, still in his coat. He looked at the folder and then at me and said nothing. "Sit down, Daniel," I said. He sat. I put the account document in front of him, the record of his mother's edition, dated 18 months ago, and I watched his face. He looked at it for a long time. He did not deny it. What he did instead was almost worse. He seemed relieved, as if the secret had been a weight he'd been carrying so long that being found out felt like being set down. "She said it was a precaution," he said, "in case anything happened." "In case anything happened to the account where my salary goes," I said. He didn't answer. "How long did you plan the brooch sale?" He closed his eyes. 4 months, he said. "We talked about it for 4 months." 4 months. 16 weeks of him kissing me goodbye in the mornings, while this ran beneath our life like groundwater. "And you wrote that I agreed," I said. "You wrote it in your own hand, knowing I hadn't agreed to anything." He opened his eyes, and what was in them wasn't guilt alone. It was also a sorrow for himself, for the corner he'd painted himself into. "I knew you'd make it into a bigger thing," he said. "Mom said—" "Stop," I said. "Don't finish that sentence." Leah came to the apartment on Saturday unannounced, which was exactly what I had expected. She arrived at 11 with the air of someone who believes showing up in person removes the possibility of being refused. She came into the living room and began with the warm, suffering voice. "I only ever wanted what was best after everything I've sacrificed." And I let her speak for 45 seconds. Then I put the folder on the coffee table and I said, "My attorney has advised me that the unauthorized addition of a third party to a joint marital account without the knowledge of one's spouse is something the court takes seriously. She has also advised me that facilitating the consignment of a marital asset without spousal consent constitutes a form of marital waste. Both are documented, both are dated, both are in her files." I looked at Leah steadily. "I'm giving you the opportunity to make this quiet. Remove yourself from the account, ensure the brooch is returned, or we file on Monday and it becomes very loud." Her composure held for 3 seconds. I counted them. Then something in it fractured, not in the way of tears or collapse, but the way a mask slips when it has been worn too long. What was underneath was fury. "After everything I have done for this family," she said, "you come in here with your lawyer and your threats?" "Yes," I said, "I do." She turned to Daniel, who was standing in the kitchen doorway, not quite in the room, not quite out of it, exactly as he always was. "Are you going to let her speak to me like this?" Daniel looked at his hands. He said nothing. The silence from him was the loudest thing in the room. In it, he chose something, even if he hadn't meant to, and Leah heard the choice, and it was not hers. She left. The door closed behind her with a soft, definitive click that was nothing like a slam, which somehow made it more final. Daniel and I stood in the quiet she'd left behind, and after a long moment he said, very quietly, "I'm sorry." I looked at him. "I know," I said. "I know you are. It doesn't fix it, but I know." The brooch arrived by registered mail 2 weeks later, in its green velvet box, exactly as it had always been. I sat at the kitchen table and opened the package and held the small gold hummingbird in my palm. Cool, intact, its emerald eye catching the morning light. And I thought about my grandmother pressing it into my hand and saying, "It knows how to hold steady." What I know now, in the months that have passed since that spring afternoon in Leah's bedroom, is this. I am the person who sat on a strange bed, holding an empty box, and felt the ground go out from under her, and then stood up. I am the person who built a folder, called an attorney, and spoke without her voice shaking. I am the person who said, "I'm giving you the opportunity to make this quiet," and meant it, and got the brooch back. Some evenings now, when the light comes through the kitchen window at the angle that makes everything look golden, I take the brooch out of its box and set it on the sill and just look at it for a moment. The garnet wings, the emerald eye, the particular stillness of a thing that has been in enough hard rooms and learned to hold steady. My grandmother was right about that. It does know. And so now, do I.